Hi, my name is Lily with Safety in Schools. If you're not familiar with us, we are advocates that expose child abuse in the troubled teen industry. In this video blog, we will be talking about borderline personality disorder and its connection to the troubled teen industry. Borderline occurs much more often in people who have a history of childhood trauma. Parental or guardian rejection, verbal assaults, devaluation, and being ignored all impact a child's identity. Those more likely to develop borderline have a childhood history of being victims of sexual abuse, physical abuse, or emotional abuse. Trauma in childhood can cause devastating psychological issues later in life. Personality disorders such as borderline may be an outcome of trauma. Because of the severe consequences of childhood trauma, it is sometimes referred to as soul murder. Dissociation and borderline may both share the etiological factors of childhood trauma. This means that for some, the disorder is a defense mechanism against childhood trauma. And because severe dissociation is a diagnostic criteria for borderline, some researchers believe that it may also be related to the emotional neglect experienced by so many of those suffering with the disorder. Since trauma is frequently associated with PTSD, it has to be examined in relation with borderline. Studies have demonstrated size reduction of the left amygdala and hippocampus that vary with the severity of PTSD. A study found that the amygdala and hippocampus size reduction in patients with both borderline and PTSD. Interestingly, further research verified that a 12% hippocampus size reduction was present in those with borderline and PTSD, whereas an 11% reduction was found in those with just borderline. Studies have found a 10 to 20% hippocampus size reduction in individuals with borderline compared to control groups without the disorder. What this means is that trauma-exposed individuals with borderline who do not have PTSD still demonstrate size difference in the brain. A 22% amygdala size reduction has been found in patients with the disorder as well. The symptoms of PTSD and borderline can overlap. PTSD and borderline commonly co-occur. Between 25 to 60% of people with borderline also have PTSD. People with both often report earlier experiences of trauma compared to people who are only diagnosed with PTSD. That being said, more women than men report high betrayal trauma, which may serve to explain why more women are diagnosed with borderline. Either women are experiencing the high betrayal trauma more often than men, or men are not as forthcoming with their trauma. A number of studies have looked at the physical and psychological consequences of having both PTSD and borderline. People with both tend to experience more symptoms. The symptoms include a pattern of unstable, intense, and stormy relationships where the person may shift between idolizing and devaluating them. Being impulsive in self-destructive ways, such as engaging in substance abuse, being sexually promiscuous, gambling, and much more. Persistent and extreme efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment by people. This includes being overly clingy or pushing people away, as well as cutting people off who upset you. Problems with identity, self-image, or a sense of who one really is. Withdrawing when upset, also known as disassociation. Reoccurring suicidal acts, threats, or deliberate self-harm. Constant feeling of emptiness. People-pleasing, trust issues, paranoia, persistent feelings of guilt and shame, social anxiety and self-isolation, frequent and intense mood swings, and the intense experience of rage and difficulties controlling one's anger. Now, how does borderline connect to the troubled teen industry? Well, as we have covered, borderline is most commonly found in survivors of childhood trauma, including but not limited to sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, and emotional abuse. Another big symptom of borderline is abandonment and trust issues. Many times parents will choose to have their child taken to a facility by a transporting agency. During this event, strangers come into the home, physically remove the child, and take them to the facility. What this does is create the start of abandonment issues. Nothing says abandonment like your parents paying people to kidnap you. While in these programs, it is not uncommon for children to be severely abused in many ways. We already know that many program survivors end up with PTSD after their forced enrollment into these places, so it's not a surprise that borderline can also have a connection. How can you trust your parents? The people you should be able to trust the most, after they paid for you to be kidnapped and tortured. If you can't trust your parents, who can you trust? Obviously, this is where the trust issues come in. Another issue that stems from borderline is unstable or abusive relationships. This can also be a side effect from being in the program. Programs strive on the theory of tough love, which they also pass on to the parents. Instead of a child getting love, compassion, and support, they are talked down to, devalued, and ignored. This treatment can cause borderline to develop. This type of treatment at a young age confuses children into thinking that that type of behavior is love. This can create massive issues when the child grows up by allowing themselves to be abused, thinking that that is love. With the added abandonment issues, it can cause someone to stay in an abusive relationship much, much longer than they should. There is not a cure for borderline personality disorder, but with proper therapy, you can learn to manage symptoms. If you have developed borderline from a program, you are not alone. I have been diagnosed with borderline, and I will say that while it is a struggle, it is manageable. You are loved, you are important, you are not crazy, you are not a burden, and it does get better. For more information, please visit our website and follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.